Sassy Sassenach. Hello everybody. Sorry it's been a little bit of a while, and by a little bit of a while I mean a very long while. I have been getting really distracted doing the extra villains. So all of Riley's pals, I got them on shelves, it's very cool. And then after that I basically was like, well, I'm going to relax and not do anything for a week or two. On top of that, I also broke my ribs running into a lamppost. That was very smart. And had all kinds of things happen to me during the time that I was supposed to be taking some time off, as often happens. So because one of the reasons I stopped putting out videos was because I got very annoyed about the audio. So I've since got a better microphone, so that should help. And I'm currently recording this with a blanket over my head. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to watch through my footage and sort of comment along as we go. So this might be a bit of an odd one, but I already had an almost ready to go video, but the audio quality is really not so great. And on top of that, the cleaned up audio I made, I seem to have deleted probably to make space for some stupid video game. Not that I would ever call Death Stranding 2 a stupid video game. And I'd really like to get back to playing that. You know, I got some walking to do. So enjoy this hopefully improved audio experience. If it's not improved, then, well, I spent a lot of time and money for no reason at all. Unfortunately, the new microphone I've got, I'm going to make it up. I think it's called the Elgato Wave 3. It seemed to be a good one that wasn't super expensive, although it was still like, you know, 2 or 3 times the price of my terrible little snowball, which is not that terrible, to be fair. But the software for it only works on Windows 11, and I'm just sort of not upgrading to Windows 11 out of bloody-minded principle. It's just, you know, Windows 10 works, and the general rule with Windows is if it works, you do not upgrade to the next version. So I'm maybe not getting quite as much quality out of this as I would like, but I've tried to fiddle around with it, and hopefully it sounds okay. When last we left our hero, I just glossed the model that I'd put the layers on, and I was preparing to use an oil wash because I can never resist using an oil wash on it. And as we'll find out, this often goes wrong for me. I just love oil washing. It's so fun. Slopping the oil wash on is just really enjoyable. And what I've done here is I've glossed the model with a gloss varnish, and that lets all of the oil wash kind of slip into the cracks. It also means that the oil wash is easier to remove. I'm mixing up an oil wash out of different oil paints. So I think I've got black, brown, and red there. I can already see my problem, which is that I'm using black. I'm using this odorless white spirit, and the issue with using black is it's very dark, obviously. I'm also going to put it on quite thickly because I like to do that. You should really err on the side of thickness when you're using oil washes rather than thinness. But the issue is that if you're using really black, a really dark oil wash, you're going to get a very stark contrast. And then depending on how you wash it off, you're going to get, this very high contrast kind of look, which actually ended up looking okay, but it really wasn't what I was going for. As you can see, I'm mixing it up in a Mexican jalapenos jar. Probably the Mexican jalapenos do not come anywhere from Mexico at all. I can't currently check that, but perhaps I'll put an update in here. And I'm also using this very high-tech burger container for Riley. And as you can see, you know, you just slop it right on, and it's real fun with the gloss varnish and the alcohol white spirit, whatever it is. I think it's white spirit. I used to use turpentine, but that strips off the acrylics as well, so don't do that. Use white spirit. You can either get the very expensive artist white spirit, or you can get this odorless stuff. It's still kind of smelly, but it's not anywhere near as smelly. And that really helps, because one of my issues is after you oil wash models, they just smell for a really long time. So as you can see, I'm having fun there, just pouring on oils all over the model and getting it nice and covered. And for certain looks, you can just sort of leave it like that. You know, if you're trying to make a really grimy metal model, some machinery, I'd maybe thin it down a little bit more than that, but you can just use that and get these really nice effects. So you don't have to just use it as this sort of unifying wash, but that's the primary way I like to do it. You can also make some really nice sort of like mud or blood effects or something like that, or goop, by just putting it on and then not washing it off. But what we're going to be doing here, I've seen referred to as the reductive technique. So we're adding loads of oil wash and then we're going to take it away. And you can see me just kind of slopping it all on. It's very fun. I think this is why I like it so much. It's just really enjoyable. And the second part that's really enjoyable is rubbing it off and having the model beautifully emerge with all these wonderful gradients and stuff, which, spoiler alert, does not happen with this model for reasons that I will explain in just a second. You can't hear my audio, but I'm really talking up how well this is going to work. I'm really tempting fate here. And unfortunately, fate is well and truly tempted and gives in to temptation against me. I've since done this again, actually, with another model that I've been painting, and did basically the exact same mistake. So I'm now getting a bit better at it. The key is really just don't leave it too long. There's a couple of keys with oil washing. One of them is to let the model fully dry, because the issue is sometimes you can rub off the paint layer underneath. And if you're using white spirits, that won't be happening because of the solvent. You don't actually even need to varnish it to protect it or anything like that. I varnish it based on what I want the wash to look like afterwards. So a gloss will preserve more of the original color underneath, create these kind of, I think the sort of military and Gundam modeling community calls it panel lines, where the oil wash just stays in the detail. I've also seen it called black lining. And the other way of doing it is use a matte varnish, and more of the color will tint the surface layers. So that way you'll create a bit more of a gradient, and it'll do more of this sort of color changing, color filtering, I think it's called. So here's our very gooped up models. And I think in a moment we'll be cutting to me outside, the worst possible audio, which I'll spare you from. You can kind of see here the model is, actually I do like the way the models look when they get oil washed. It has a very nice finish, an oily finish as you'd imagine. But what happened was the first video I was taking it at about 2 or 3 in the morning. And by this time, about 16 hours have passed. I'm joined by Bean, who's there in the garden eating a stick. And he's providing me moral support as I quickly realized that it's not coming off. It's not coming off. It's coming off the very surface, but because the oil wash is so thick and dark, it's leaving this very stark pattern rather than the surface comes off light. These sort of mid-tones come off a bit less light. So you can see me here, you know, I'm adding some solvent. The original go was just with a dry sponge, which is all you need for most of getting off the oil wash. So I usually will go all over the model with a dry sponge, and that gets most of it off, but leaves this kind of color filter over it. And then you can use either a sponge or a Q-tip or something. People keep recommending some special Q-tips, not regular ones. I've used regular ones. I think you're supposed to use sort of makeup Q-tips that don't leave fibers, which makes sense. Got some on the way, so I'll try those out when I get the chance. But so I'm putting some solvent on to actually remove the oil wash. And you can see that's working much better. The good thing about oils is they take a really long time to dry, so you can reactivate them as solvents. You know, this is, 16 hours of drying later, and it's still coming off very well with the solvents. The issue then being is that because the point of the sponge is it doesn't reach into the recesses, basically all of it is coming off of the surface. Because the oils have mostly, or at least, partially cured, the deal with oils is they don't dry, they cure. That's what makes them sort of set solidly, and that's a chemical process that takes a certain amount of time, rather than just the liquid evaporating from them. And because basically all the oils have cured, at least they won't have fully cured, otherwise the solvent, I don't think, would affect them. Maybe it still would, but it wouldn't affect them as harshly. So the top layer is coming off with the solvent, but it can't reach into the cracks. And if I start, you can use a paintbrush basically. I probably could have actually removed all of the oil wash if I wanted by using a paintbrush with some mineral spirits. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted, mistakes into miracles. Even though I was kind of like, oh no, I've ruined it. I still always, you can always fix things. So I always knew, all it means is I'm going to have to take more effort. This is going to be less lazy than I'd prefer. And actually the oils looked quite good on the car, on Wayne the Wyvern. And so I didn't really mind that. You can see the nice fluorescent orange is really popping out as I take it off. The oils going into the cracks on the Wyvern's face are really nice. All those scale patterns coming out. That's basically what like any wash, I just feel like an oil wash kind of looks nicer and it's more fun. It's just very satisfying. It really pops out the details. So I tried to put a lot of details into my models, a lot of like little texture and wrinkles and things like that. And a good painter could paint those, but I'm not a good painter. So I use techniques, and oil wash is a nice technique to pop all of those out for free almost. So since I did this wrong, what did I do wrong? I used a wash that was a little bit too dark, probably not that much too dark, but I would have used a slightly more coloured wash rather than just this dark, very black wash. I don't think it was meant to be black. I think it was meant to be a kind of a very dark red brown, but it just sort of turns out black because of black just overpowering everything. I left it for too long. It was maybe a little bit thick, but I don't think the thickness actually matters that much. The main issue was leaving it for like 12 hours too long, at least. And that meant that a lot of it had already kind of like set, or at least partially set. It wasn't able to just come off easily. And as you can see, I'm really having to go at it with a solvent-covered sponge. And usually if you're using solvents on oils, they come off real quick. So you can see I'm just dunking that in there. I think what I'm probably actually doing off camera is squeezing it out. You don't want to have the sponge or anything soaked. You just want it to have some solvent on it. And that makes it strip much better. Because I'm doing it here because I messed up, but I will use solvent anyway in removing it, because what I tend to do is use a dry sponge to get rid of everything, and then use a Q-tip or a sponge with a little bit of solvent, and that helps me get like the tint off. So if I want the full underlying color to come out in some highlight areas, I can do that. If you want, that can be a really nice way to edge highlight for free. I hate highlighting and edge highlighting because it takes a long time and is meticulous. And here you can see the sort of finished model. I was a little bit despairing at this point. This was not exactly what I had hoped for, but it still looks okay. And actually, as you'll see a little bit further down the line, this created a kind of grungy comic book effect that I would keep for this series of villain models, at least for this rendition of them. I've painted a couple versions of them now, which I'll show you in a little while. And this kind of comic booky style is something that I keep. I quite like. You know, it works fairly well for the villains. But what this now means is I need to clean everything up. Instead of this being basically almost the end and I do the little details, I now need to clean up this model. And that means essentially kind of almost painting it again. Not exactly, but it takes about the same amount of time. And it's something that I try to avoid. But at this point I was figuring, well, I want this model to look nice. So I was going to give it my all, as it were. So I'm back again, and it's time to paint Riley again. What I figure is because I've put too much stuff in the cracks, because there's these very harsh shadows in the cracks, all I need to do is basically go into the shadows with a nice sort of translucent shadow tone and kind of even them out, get that gradient that I was wanting in the first place. It's ended up like as a nice base, because what I've essentially done is a very chunky black line or panel line, which works quite well for giving it this comic book effect, but it looks quite messy and potentially looks unintentional. I mean, to be honest, I think, you know, it looks as good as a mass-produced painted toy looks, but I like it to look a little bit better than that. So what I'm going to need to do is kind of do these layers again, pick out a couple of little details, and that'll be that. And I think I'm showing off the finish here, so it creates this kind of nice effect that I like actually, but I'm going to need to think about how I finish it at the end, which is, by finishing I mean doing varnishes, things like that, whether it's going to be matte or gloss. At the moment what we have is a model that's been glossed, and then the oils over it are kind of matte, or at least they're much matter than the gloss is. So it creates these kind of matte shadows and shiny surfaces, which actually I quite like as a look, but it's not necessarily, you know, consistently what we're after. So I spend a little bit of time talking about how I don't have a plan. I'm just going to wing it, and to the surprise of everybody, I'm sure. But what I am going to do is I'm going to paint the license plate on the Wyvern, which isn't painted at the moment, pick out some of the details. As I say, I'm going to go over the oil wash lines so that they're a little bit less harsh. I'm probably going to use some acrylic washes, and I'm using speed paint medium on my paints to make them a little bit translucent. Speed paints are a sort of cross between a fully, what's the opposite of transparent? Is it matte? I'm drawing a blank here. Opaque, that's the word. I was going to say non-sparent otherwise, but basically they're a cross between a transparent and a non-sparent paint. A semi-sparent paint, if you will. So they're kind of like a thinned paint with a little bit of something or other, probably a surfactant of some kind, that is going to make it so that it breaks the surface tension and the paint flows primarily into the pigment flows primarily into the cracks. So it'll shade it. Often some of the nice ones will have, you know, like a different colored shade to the primary color, so that you get this sort of maybe a yellow surface and an orange shade, for example, if you want to get a nice fiery effect on a speed paint. Just sort of talking out of my bum here, but as far as I know, you can sort of mix up your own, you can certainly mix up your own wash medium and maybe contrast paint, speed paint, whatever, semi-transparent paint medium by adding a little bit of what we call washing up liquid and the Americans call dish soap. So if you add a little bit of that to some water, that's basically a wash medium, because the washing up liquid is acting as a surfactant. It breaks the surface tension of the water, which means it doesn't create that nice, stable, flat surface that water goes into. Instead, it flows into the cracks. So if you're looking for a way to make cheap washes, add a drop of washing up liquid to some water and then dilute some paint and you'll make a nice wash. I use it if I'm sort of washing big things in bulk, like buildings or terrain. So I've added some red to the wheels. That was one of the main things that I thought about. Just lovely camera work as well. It is very funny watching these and just seeing me completely fail to get the model in focus, because this is my second time around and I was like, I'm seriously going to do it right this time. And it hasn't worked out so good. I do need to figure out some sort of solution for this if I'm going to do this again. And I've got some fluorescent paint. That's where all my fluorescent paint went. I've recently been painting some of my own sculpts to play war games with, and a big part of the scheme is fluorescent yellow, and I was wondering where all the fluorescent yellow went. I guess it must have been here. So I'm going in with some of the fluorescent paints. These are the golden high flow acrylics that I love so much. Very nice fluorescents. Very expensive though. I think probably I would just get the Army Painter fluorescents if I was on a budget. They are so much cheaper. For airbrushing, I've been finding the high flow acrylics are wonderful. They just don't clog, even if I'm using them straight. And I complained about this in the airbrushing video again, but Vallejo, Baeo, their primers, their paints in general through the airbrush are just no good. No me gusta. And I had an incredibly bad clog at trying to use a very tried and true way of diluting some primer, and just gave up on my most recent attempt to do that. And then I had a long session of just like never having to clean the airbrush in between like several color changes of the high flow acrylics with no dilution whatsoever. It was wonderful. So I'm going into all the flames because this was one of the main areas that I was unhappy with what the wash had done, which, you know, now I'm thinking about it, of course it did. The wash was way too dark. Black over yellow is never going to look nice, which is why I was trying to go for a dark red wash. It's just a lot of the times, you know, it doesn't end up the way you want it to. It looked cool out of the gate. And actually, like I say, I pretty much went and did the same thing again on Riley's Friends on purpose, because I liked the overall effect it gave. It wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't what I planned, but, you know, mistakes into miracles. It did end up being pretty good. Some great camera work there. And just the camera really struggling to focus is very funny as well. And I'm saying some very wise things while completely failing to put the model in the camera most of the time. What I'm talking about is, you know, was there any point in doing this oil wash in the first place if I'm just going to basically cover it all up? And yes, this channel is about showing that you really don't need to be a master at things, especially things like, you know, camera work, making it so that anybody can see what you're doing in your painting videos. And you can still get nice results. You know, you don't need to really stress over having the perfect process or anything like that. I mean, there's different types of people, right? Some people really, really want to have all that perfectly down. And that's absolutely fine. If you do, you're probably going to end up doing some really nice stuff. But if you don't, and you feel daunted, or you feel like, well, I'm never going to be able to hold all this stuff in my head, it's fine. It's painting. It's supposed to be fun. And those mistakes are going to kind of add up to visual interest, as we say. What I find is that if you do this oil wash, even if it all goes wrong, and then, you know, you're going to have to take some time to fix it, but it's fine. You are going to have to take some time on it anyway. You'll end up with something that's more interesting than if you'd never have washed it in the first place. So elements of that wash will be left behind, even though I'm kind of going in and I'm sort of covering up quite a lot of what I did. Painting tiny dragons' fingernails, of course, always a good use of your time. occasionally some sort of absurd Homer Simpson style strands of my hair are coming into view of the camera. So that's very good as well. By the way, as I say, I'm recording this under a blanket and I'm in a jumper, and it's like recording this in a sauna. But I do like saunas, so that's quite nice. But we'll see how long I can tolerate this. Nobody needed to know this, but I'm a very sweaty person. Not normally when I'm just sitting around, but as soon as things heat up, it's sweat time. I like to think I'm very efficient at cooling, but there are many downsides. Now I'm coming in doing the skin with this nice light pink to kind of bring that out. My attempt to show the model. Very well done, Jack. Like, I'll bring it up here. That'll make it easier to see. The problem is my the holder on my phone covers the screen. What I really need to do is just stream it to my computer as I'm recording, but I didn't do that, did I? And I can't go back and do that. Inventing a time machine would be a bit much out of scope for this video. And I'm talking about how I should really learn how to paint faces. That is still a thing. Some people are really good at them. I assume there's probably a couple of tips that could make my faces way, way, way better. At the moment, I just kind of wash them and add a bit of a warm red color to the sort of cheeks and nose or wherever I want to. And I'm also lamenting the state of fluorescent blues, which, yeah, I haven't found a good, like, glowy blue. I'm not entirely sure why that is. You can sort of get it by using a kind of white base coat and then using translucent fluorescent blue. But whereas the others are these really bright colors, you know, well, I guess by its nature, blue is not that bright, but you can get bright blues. So, you know, actually forget what I said. Don't listen to me. I'm cooking alive. And I think I'm deciding what metallics I'm going to use here. This Aztec gold is one that I had a lot of hope for, but I then found out isn't actually green, really. I have a much nicer green gold from, what is it? I forget if it's Dark Star Paints, Molten Metallics, something like that. And I really rate those as metallics. They're my favorite kinds of metallics. The only issue with them is their coverage isn't very good. Look at this wonderful painting footage, by the way. Incredible. And these, if you use 2 coats of them, the Dark Star Metallics metals are the best, as far as I'm concerned. Although I haven't bought any in a couple of years, so maybe they ruined them, but I don't think so. And they have some really nice colors, some quite, certainly at the time, very unique metals. You can see, I think Aztec gold is kind of an attempt to do that kind of green gold. I don't know whether they're big enough for people to try to copy them, but they're certainly the first ones I saw do it, and like blue silvers that look very nice and things like that. I forget if I'll end up using some for this. I may well, because I like them. And here I think I'm basically, after early in the video, saying, what I love about these high flow acrylics is even the red has very good coverage. I'm now having to go over and redo all of the red because the coverage isn't very good, because that's just red. Certain paints like red and yellow are pretty notorious for not being great. Dark red's usually good. Something in this blanket is creaking and distracting me. It sounds like the roof's about to cave in my head, so apologies if that does happen. Or if that's somehow something that you can hear, but I can't. Oh yeah, and I'm actually maybe going to use a Citadel paint, because as part of a painting contest that I'm doing at the Merchants Guild, the friendly local gaming store that is very nicely stocking my miniatures, this Critical Roller charity collection, available now in shelves on Glasgow, on shelf in the Merchant Guild, on Albion Street. Go buy them. All proceeds to charity. Anyway, they were also doing a painting contest at this time using Citadel paints, where they give you 4 paints and then you paint a model they give you, which was very fun, actually. I didn't win the contest, but I did come joint third. It's all politics, you know. But that was quite fun. Learning to use a limited palette and all the limitations in the rules was actually pretty fun to work around. But it has left me with 4 pots of Citadel paints, which, as I was just showing off there, the issue with them is those tops, you know, like, okay, so you can't drop the paint onto the palette. You have to use a brush to gunk into it and then put it out on the palette, which gives you like an extra brush that you've got to use and clean. And then it'll also gum up the whole top and make it so the paint dries out if you aren't meticulous. And here's actually my very successful, I believe, painting the eyes. This time around, I believe this was when I bought a set of new brushes from Cass Art, which is an art shop I really like, actually. I think it's a chain. They've just got good prices, and particularly for oil paints. Their home brand oil paints, they have kind of a scale of prices, but all of the cheap series are very cheap for the amount of oil paints you get, and they're good. You know, I'm not an oil painting artist, so I can't say that I'm an authority. These are high pigment or whatever, but they work very well for oil washes, and they're much cheaper than the hobby Abteilung, whatever the hell they're called, the specialist ones I have. But I went and bought some new brushes from them, and that made a huge difference, as it obviously would. But it'd been a while since I bought any brushes. And they actually have a mini painting brush set that's fairly cheap. Certainly cheaper than, like, you know, Citadel or something. And it's funny, I basically went in because there's this big deal about, you know, the quality of brushes. Sable brushes are the ones that everybody bangs on about. I think they're a little bit... There's a morality question, because I'm fairly sure a sable is like a cute animal that they kill and then yank all the fur out of. Unless you just give it a nice haircut and then it goes to live on a farm. But I don't think that's how it works. Perhaps it is. So there's a big deal about kind of like sable or other types of hair brushes. And there's a bit of a kind of... I mean, maybe I'm making this up. Maybe this is just my impression. But my impression is there's a bit of a snobbishness about synthetic brushes. But it actually seems like for acrylics, which is what most mini paints are, you should use synthetics because they're a bit rough on the brushes and they're too rough on the hair brushes. Some lovely eye dotting action going on there. So I got some nice new synthetic brushes that are cheap but have points, and even some of them are fairly small. Too small perhaps, but it's nice to have one or two small brushes, even though what's really important is the point rather than the size. But a teeny brush definitely makes, you know, like eyes and such easier to do. So now we're going into the acrylic washing stage. And if I remember correctly, I'm basically lamenting the state of acrylic washes and them being like, I want to oil wash it again. But I restrain myself. For the models I sell, I tend to just use acrylic washes because it's much faster. It has this more sort of cartoony effect, a less grungy effect. I think for the villains, the grungy effect is actually pretty good. But for the heroes, for example, I do think the just bright, cartoony acrylic wash looks a lot nicer. Oh, I figured out what the structurally dangerous sounding noise is. It's actually me moving my own feet. So I was being frightened by my own feet. But what I'm doing here is I'm using a purple wash over the yellow and red. I'm always reading constantly different things about, you know, how to do color theory and tones and shading. But one of the ones that I saw was that what you want to do is to make a nice shade is basically move the color over to the purple end of the wheel. I think what they were saying is you move it one step closer to purple. But here I decided I can make it look nice by using its contrasting color. So the complementary color to yellow is purple. And so I use a purple shade for that. What I then found is actually the purple looks quite nice. For everything, it shades onto the red, shades onto a lot of the colors. So I start using quite a lot of purple here as a kind of second panel lining or second wash. I'm doing a little bit of metallics, popping out the metallics on these wheels, picking out some details on the crucial banana, and then adding some of the metal highlights and different metal colors, using one of the Vallejo metal color silver, I think is what it's called, and it's really nice. I love this silver, actually. It's becoming one of my favorite paints, so I'm wondering if maybe more of those are interesting. Some people, the true pros, use non-metallic metal, which is where you make it look like metal, but you're painting with regular paints, and it's kind of a way of showing off. But it's also a way of making it so that like the shine is exactly the way you want it at all times. But I really like metallic paints, I always have, and I think it creates this nice little additional variation. You kind of have your sort of... What's fun, for me at least, is using lots of different kind of contrasting types of color. So cold colors and warm colors, change the temperature. So we've got blue and red, for example, in this model. Riley is obviously mostly warm colors, but we've got then a little bit of blue to pop him out. We've got a dark wash as well. Then you've also got the finish. I, for the life of me, actually can't remember how I ended up finishing this model, whether I left it as is or whether I did varnish it. The model is now in the Merchants Guild shop in Glasgow, so I can't have a look at it. But what I'll often do is do a variety of finishes as well. So, for example, I would have, you know, glossy eyes and metal, maybe some matte fabric and some satin skin. And they all have slightly different shines to them, and that looks different as well. My glove has been destroyed, but at least I'm, you know, coming up to the end now. And on top of that, you then have metallic colors and non-metallic colors. I think certainly when you're making sort of CGI, they talk about roughness and metallic. I think roughness is basically what you would call the finish. And then, of course, how metallic something is how metallic something is. So I feel like by not using metallics, you're kind of missing out on a spectrum of difference that you can add in. It's nice to have some colors be matte and some colors be metallic. What I'm going to do is put some pupils in with a pen, a little micron pen, and then I'm adding a tiny little dot of white with a brush and doing a pretty good job of it. So everybody cheer, the eyes came out well. I make a hilarious joke about how I'm not supposed to be touching these with bare hands, so I'll use my hands instead. It's very funny, everyone laughs. But yeah, that is the end of the painting Riley. And, you know, this was a month ago that I did this, but it had taken a long time since the start of this project. I forget exactly when I started it, but, you know, it was quite a while ago. And obviously, mainly the issue with the time is making these videos and editing them and recording everything. And then I also went on to make Riley a series of friends, which I'll also make videos and edit them on the creation of. But now we're, coming to the end of this project. I mean, in real life, outside of YouTube, this project has ended. The fundraiser's still going though, and will do for as long as Whizz Kidz lets me do it. Don't know how long that is. I should probably ask them. Certainly for the rest of this month. I'll also be running the marathon for Whizz Kidz to raise money, the London Marathon at the end of the month, which is why I broke my ribs running into a lamppost. It's an important part of training to do that. So yeah, thanks so much for being here during the process. It was fun to record it for Prosperity. Apologies that you couldn't see any of the actual painting because I don't know what the heck I'm doing apparently, which shouldn't surprise anybody really. It was my first attempt. Well, actually, this is technically my second attempt, and if anything, it's worse than the first one in terms of keeping things in focus. But, you know, some good banter, some good crack. Is it crack? Crake? I think it's crack. Just pretending to be more regional than I am. A provincial rather than a London-born lad. But yeah, so I'll go dig up some footage of the finished Riley model and see how that goes. So here's the finished Riley Redcrest model, the first villain rival of the Critical Rollers, the Dragon Knight. Originally going to be one of a kind, but now has 3 friends. This is the finished oil-painted model, looking a little grungy and messy, as my style tends to be. I think it fits the villain aesthetic quite well. But one of the advantages of this video being edited in the future is I can also show the acrylic version of Riley with a brighter, more colourful version of the scheme once I'd really understood, you know, what I was going to use in the scheme. This is the acrylic washed version rather than the oil wash, so the colours are much more vibrant. I've also just used brighter colours in general on Wayne the Wyvern after I decided I wanted to pick out that kind of blue tone to really keep up the nice complementary colours with red, yellow, orange, and then blue complementing those, and with some nice white daffodils to really pop those as well. And that is the Riley miniature finished. And we also have the inaugural rolling of the Riley footage, which will also feature some of the villains in the background as spoilers. You know, don't look too closely at them. That's cheating. And so signing off, project complete. This model's available in stores. Available in store. I'll put it online as well. All the proceeds going to charity. When I first started this project, I really did want to have these villains done, so it's real nice to have them done. I'll do a little summary video probably after I've edited the remaining villain sculpts and shown them off because they're pretty cool. They get more and more elaborate as they go on. And I'll do a little conclusion to this series, but as far as Riley's journey goes, this is the end. Or is it just the beginning? Because, like a wheelchair, time just keeps on rolling forward. And we sit on top of it and get carried forward, but we can try and direct things with our hands if we like. What is that a metaphor for? Well, what is a metaphor? See you everyone. Remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell. There'll be more villain videos coming out, and I'm completing a pretty big project at the moment, so I might do a video on that as well, to show you the kind of silly stuff I get up to if I'm not doing stuff for charity. Thanks for everybody who's watched so far up to this point, and a sassy Sassenach goodbye. Or let's make that a sassy Sassenach. See you later.